And good morning. My name is Ryan Belmore, owner and publisher of What'sUpNewp. It is Wednesday, September 18th at 10 a.m. And we are excited to kick off and launch a new feature here at What'sUpNewp. As many of you who have been watching for a while, we've been doing interviews with the superintendent on the last Wednesday of every month, 30 minutes with her. And when it's not election season, we do Ask the Mayor, Ask the Council, Ask the Candidates, which we have to you, and is Ask the City Manager. And joining us today for the first time is Mr. Colin Kennedy. Colin, how are you? Yeah, and I think this is a good opportunity. We'll be doing this on approximately the third Wednesday of every month for 30 minutes. There's some holidays that get in the way there as we get through November, December, but people can submit questions. They can visit What'sUpNewp.com. There's a tab, Ask the City Manager. Drop in some questions. We do have some questions today, and we will get to. But and we recognize that not all questions will be able to be answered here on the fly, especially since I haven't provided the city manager with any. So we might have to follow up with you, which I will follow up with anybody who does submit a question. The city manager and I will both do that. 65 days. You just celebrated 2 months on the job. You came into this busy season of the year, election year, some pretty big infrastructure projects going on. How's it going so far?
Really well so far. I'm really enjoying meeting people in the community. I'm trying to get out a lot to some of the various neighborhood associations. I was just with Top of the Hill last night. We had a wonderful discussion for a couple of hours, just answering questions, telling them a little bit about myself, some of my visions, some of my background, things I love to do and why I pursued this job, like strategic planning and revenue generation, modernizing the way we look at and analyze data in City Hall, trying to make ourselves more like the world-class city that we are and less like a small town in terms of the capabilities that we have. So I'm really excited about all those things, to meet people, to learn about the staff. I truly believe that everybody wakes up with an amazing positive intent for the City of Newport, but there are some things that we can do better too. So I'm putting a fresh set of eyes on some things and looking forward to making some positive changes. I never look to throw anyone under the bus. I just said, have we thought about it this way? Could we do it better this way? I'm really engaging well with the staff so far and look forward to continuing to do so.
Yeah, I think with any time you take over a position in any type of career, that somebody who's been there for a long time, a fresh set of eyes can be exciting and different and new. I'm wondering, what are some of the things that have surprised you the most since taking over the role? What's something that you didn't think you would be dealing with, or something that has surprised you, or make it a couple 3-part question here, something residents would be surprised about?
So to answer the first part of your question, I am surprised, not in a bad way, but I was surprised how much information flows to the city manager about things like traffic safety and pedestrian safety. And I come to the job thinking I'm trying to figure out how to solve infrastructure for 20 years from now, and how to improve educational outcomes, how to make ourselves a more world-class customer service agency. And instead, sometimes I get bogged down in answering questions about why is there no speed enforcement on Ruggles Avenue. I'm not saying these aren't valid things, but this is where I think a better structure to the city staff. And more awareness of where residents and visitors can call when they have concerns about these questions are good. I'm not saying I don't care. I'm just saying, everything seems to funnel to the city manager's office, but I've got a staff of 350 people to help me. So I want to get a little bit better. I'm surprised that some of that information funnels up, but I'm looking forward to giving better options for folks to submit some of those concerns.
Yeah, and I guess that's a good place to start here, because one of the goals I hope that we accomplish here with our monthly chats is helping people know where to turn when they need something or have a complaint. For example, and I'm not picking on John because I want to know the answer of what the city manager believes, but John asks, how many cars, motorcycles have been ticketed for excessive noise? I have another question from some resident, Anthony, who asked, what is the plan for repaving Spring Street and adding a bike lane? When people have these questions, or they need a trash can emptied, or What is the process you think that residents should follow? Is it contacting your ward candidate, your city council? What's the right way? How can we help you?
I certainly want any resident so that they always have, there's an inherent right to contact your elected representatives whenever and for whatever reason they want to. So I certainly don't want to stand in the way of anything like that. For example, if you're observing a heavy amount of unsafe traffic or speeding on a certain street, I would advise that in my opinion, the first call should be to the non-emergency number at the police department. Maybe then follow that up with a notification, if you so choose, to your elected representative saying, hey, I just called the police department about this, but I want you to know that too. But it's also, it's important to realize that, there might be an option that the police department can quickly move a vehicle to another street that happened to be, doing some enforcement patrols just one block over, if only they knew. But that information doesn't flow fast enough when it's coming through elected representatives. So that's not to say that I don't support any resident, their inherent ability, their inherent right to contact their elected representative. But I just urge that, maybe sometimes that call comes second or third instead of first, because they are not dispatch agents, and we're asking for residents to kind of work through the staff as well as their elected representatives. I have a great staff. They're very responsive. If you have an overflowing trash bin, you can contact the Public Services Department, and the folks from the city yard will be out there in no time to take a look at that if it's the case. I also do believe that our city website could use some modernization. I compare it to some other cities and towns in Rhode Island, and I recognize that some of our website technology and displays are a bit 1990s vintage. And they could be more user-friendly. And so that's something that I'm going to be working with our communications department to improve. Up until now, I had a communications director and department of one person. They now have three. We finally hired some additional staff to help him out, and I'm looking forward to making some improvements in those areas. So residents have a better idea of where they can look to for information about phone numbers to dial and email addresses to send things to. Also, to answer the question about noise, I didn't want to forget about it from John. We went through a period of warnings because we were improving some of the technology with the noise trailers. That period is over. As of September 4th, we started issuing noise violations. We issued 4 that day. Those were the first processed as actual citations, and they were for $250 a piece. So these are not small fines. The additional processing has occurred since. I would just have to contact the police department to find out how many tickets have been issued since then. But any resident is welcome to do that. They have that data over there. So if you were to contact the non-emergency number and make a request for information under the Open Records Act, they would be obligated to get back to you.
Excellent. Appreciate it. We'll get to some other questions in just a short time. I'm wondering, City Manager, how can people, you're just getting your feet wet, even though it's been 2 months and about 30 hours of city council meetings in 2 months, but how can people support you? How can people help you do the best job that the city deserves and, that you want to do?
No, I appreciate that question. Really, that's just a matter of learning who on our staff is a good point of contact, because I am only as efficient and effective as the staff that works for me, and they are incredibly hardworking American patriots who are just as good and just as dedicated as any military service member I ever worked with. That's something I heard about municipal government before I decided to pursue it as a line of work, that the best patriots in America work in city halls and town offices. And I have found that to be incredibly true, but they can't help our residents if they don't know about some of the issues going on. So this is where I definitely encourage our residents to find out the appropriate, to learn more about the organizational structure of the City of Newport, whether it be public safety or utilities or public services, our communications department, our finance department, and then go ahead and make those phone calls. Now, I do recognize that there are some occasions when it's difficult to get through. We have phone lines that get jammed very easily, especially in departments like collections. We are working on modernizing the ability to field those calls from residents. And that's something I recognize that as a weakness, but I don't want to discourage people from continuing to try to make those calls and leaving those voicemails, because Once you learn who on a staff can help you, then that information flows to me, and it allows me to observe trends, to see the big picture, and to determine where I need to kind of put my fingers on the pulse, and where maybe necessarily I don't have to. Helps me manage my time more efficiently.
Yeah, and speaking of managing time, obviously you're getting up to speed. It was the summer season. There's some infrastructure things going on. Election season. There's a $98 million bonds coming up. What are some of the big things that you're working on now, and what's coming down? What should residents know that you're working on right now, and what's coming?
So right now, first and foremost, in about 45 minutes, we're going to have a meeting about utility billing. We recognize that to a great extent, we had a well-intentioned fee structure that was put in place to, hold on, I just lost my screen. It was put in place to attempt to push a lot of the burden for stormwater, the stormwater component of the wastewater and stormwater bill, that's the sewer bill, onto seasonal dark homes and weekend getaway type of houses that don't participate and contribute to the infrastructure when those residents are not there. But unfortunately, we missed the mark a little bit and unintentionally put a lot of that burden on many of the consumers in our community that we just did not realize used as little water as they did. So we had some planning assumptions that didn't pan out, and we're straight up, just to be honest, we're apologetic for that, and we're going to make sure we get it right. So we're having this meeting today to give our residents a chance to talk about that. And then we can go to work between the city administration and the council on a pathway to fix that and to provide some rebates to residents who may have been overbilled. That said, and this speaks to the bond question as well, there is still a metric ton of infrastructure pressure on our systems, not only utilities, but facilities and the beach, exacerbated all the more by climate change. So that's why we're hiring a director of resilience and sustainability to look at some of these things long-term, to look at bigger pictures. But I don't want residents feeling like the city is just out for more and more money grabs. That is not, I say again, not what this is. To anybody listening, I would say, all of us at some point or another in our lives have borrowed money for something, whether it be for a car or for a home. Those are healthy debts. This is not like racking up credit card debt. This is healthy debt to help improve your quality of life. And that's what a bond measure does. It is a community taking on healthy debt to invest in capital projects that we simply don't have the upfront money available for. But the return on that investment, is going to be fantastic. For example, I just heard I heard a resident yesterday ask me a question about, at the top of the Hill Association meeting, about what it means to nourish a beach. And it dawned on me that there's this perception out there that nourishing a beach means bringing in 6,000 dump trucks of sand and dumping it on the beach. That's not what it is. Actually, it's the Army Corps of Engineers or a similar contractor going out into the water and combing back the sand that natural forces have pulled out to sea over the course of 3 decades or more. So really what we're doing, we're not bringing in any new sand. The sand's already there. We just need to scoop it up and drag it back into shore. And this needs to be done on a recurring basis about every 5 to 10 years. Communities like St. Augustine and Virginia Beach have figured this out. So what that does, the return on the investment for that line item in the bond, what it does, for example, is prevent breaking waves from more easily eroding the structures at the side of the beach. And more importantly, it prevents that wave action during winter storms. Those waves break farther out to sea, and so they don't threaten the structures, they don't threaten Memorial Boulevard, and most importantly, they don't threaten the levee that holds our drinking water supply back from the ocean. So these are things that if we don't do, there will continue to be natural erosion that will eventually threaten something as significant and serious as our drinking water supply. So these are not money grab line items. We don't want a big sinkhole opening up underneath Parati Park. We want some funding availability through the bonds that allow us to go out for even more money in grant funds. For example, some of the bond items are grant matches. They're anticipatory amounts of money that will allow us to triple or quadruple what we can get from a grantor because the only requirement is that we have some percentage, like 20 or 25% of a match to that bond, or I'm sorry, to that grant offer. So this, to some extent, some of these amounts of money are access to much larger pots of money that would not put any of the burden on our resident taxpayers, but instead spread them out through granting agencies such as the federal and state governments. So it's an amazing opportunity that I would be sorry to see missed. And I'm excited for what this loan to the city can do. Yes, of course, we'll pay it back. We're obligated like any borrower to do that. But the return on investment is what I want people to focus on. I'm hoping they really kind of take a look at the bigger picture and see, wow, we can do some amazing things with these funds that will put our city in good position for the next 30 to 50 years, so that at that point we're not looking back, a generation from now and saying, gosh, we really missed an opportunity and now we're falling into the ocean.
When you mentioned bigger picture, and sometimes I think there's, especially if you attend a city council meeting, and I'm not picking on my friends there, but when they go 5 hours, I think sometimes things might get lost. The bigger picture of why this bond is important, and even why a sewage tax was important to roll out, is because there are a lot of infrastructure needs in the city of Newport. And I just wonder if you could put it in layman's terms of why city council, why city staff is looking so much at generating revenue or finding new ways to generate revenue, and what faces them, what's ahead of them that you need to tackle, you and your staff.
So I touched on it before, but I'll touch on it again. A big part of that, first of all, you're right. We need to derive more revenue that doesn't fall on the shoulders of our full-time residents. I believe through some napkin math, so you'll have to trust me on this, but I'll kind of briefly explain how I got there. I think we're a city of 105,000 people. Now you're probably saying, what? No, the census says we're only 24,000, 25,000. That's true. That's our full-time residents and families who vote and go to school here. But there's another 55,000 equivalent residents. That's what the 4 million visitors per year do in terms of the tax on our infrastructure. And none of them pay any property tax. It's 4 million. I figure they stay an average of 5 days each. So 4 million times 5 divided by 365, you get 55,000. That's the equivalent full-time residency demand on our services and our infrastructure. And of course, all of it a big ton of it happens during the summer. So it's real strained for about 6 months a year. So if we're not drawing any property tax revenue from those visitors, where are we getting it from? Well, we're only getting 1% from hotels, and that's assuming they even stay in Newport. Many of them stay in Middletown or other communities because it's cheaper. We get 1% when they sit down to have a meal and a beverage. That's not enough. For the volume of visitors we get, we need to do a better job of working with our state General Assembly delegation to promote legislation that enables Newport to draw more from its visitors than other communities might, because the way we're structured and the way we're set up is simply uniquely different. East Greenwich might be a little bit of a comparable example, but their property taxes are like $21, and ours are only $6.97 for our residents. So we don't want the bulk of this pain to fall on residents. We want it to fall on our visitors, and to some extent, some of our seasonal homeowners who have the luxury of having a second home. All of these entities we welcome, but we want them to pay their fair share in terms of the demand that they place on our city and our infrastructure.
In regards to why it's important that everybody kind of pays their fair share, whether they're a resident or visitor, is you'll hopefully know the number better than I do. $500 million in needed for infrastructure improvements.
Yeah, it's about $500 million. If we were to fix everything we feel like we need to fix today, based on the deferred maintenance the maintenance that we've deferred over the last 30 to 50 years, it's not a phony number. We've done the estimates. It's about $500 million. The bond is simply the first bite out of the elephant that we need to eat one bite at a time. And so we feel that we've put the most important and urgent projects on that allocation list. Again, subject to change. An allocation list is nothing more than a plan to deviate from. So it's the best guess of, if we could do everything right now today and have it done, this is what we would do. But that's not going to be the same, a month or 6 months from now. So we're asking the voters to understand that we've looked at these issues very carefully, very studiously. We've selected what we feel to be the most urgent needs because of the most deferred maintenance or items that are threatened, such as drinking water supplies, and saying this is the first bite of the elephant we want to take. In the meantime, I don't want our residents thinking that the rest is going to be covered by $400 million of other bonds. First of all, that would be irresponsible if we're not looking at alternative sources of revenue and not making the most out of the grant opportunities that are available so that we can get funds from other government, through other government transfers, or even in some cases, private sources and donations and philanthropy. There's a lot that we need to look at. This bond will help us with the most urgent needs, but the other 400 million or so in needed infrastructure improvements, we will continue to look at in the future and prioritize and reprioritize, but looking at alternative sources of revenue to help cover those costs.
I'm going to get this question. We touched on it, but I think it was a good question regarding rollouts. When thinking about the sewage tax and the surprise it took many by, I believe you already answered this, but I want to make sure I get people's questions. And is there a better way to roll these things out, communicate with residents?
Yeah, no, that's an entirely fair question. I'll just being brutally honest, I think we missed the mark on that. I think there was a sense that because the public hearings on the budget had taken place in May and June, and it was known by those who had been watching those presentations that the effects would take place in July. I think we just, not intentionally, but there was a little bit of complacency thinking, oh, well, that was just a month or so ago that it was decided, so we don't need to tell the residents that. But in retrospect, when you're changing a fee structure and imposing, not new rates, but imposing a new base charge that hadn't existed before, you really need to remind the residents of that. And so that's something we're taking on board as a lesson learned. We're apologetic for that. I firmly believe that the public deserved a better opportunity to kind of see that coming before it hit their mailboxes. And we're going to get better at that. The communications department for the City of Newport was massively underfunded for years. It was one person for an equivalent population of 105,000 is wholly inadequate. So that's why in last year's budget, we invested 2 more assistants in that department. That department now has 3, and I hope to continue to expand it going forward. But our ability to communicate with our consumers, not just by standard traditional print media, but with all of the other ways that we produce and promulgate information in 2024, social media and elsewhere. That's something we need to get better at, and then being forthcoming about upcoming significant changes to the things that touch our residents most, which are taxes and fees. So I acknowledge that we missed the mark on that. The city staff takes responsibility for that, and the promise from me as the new city manager is that now that I've comprehended that, we'll do better in the future. Our residents deserve that.
You are the new city manager, but you're not new to Newport. One of the things, looking up, 4-time resident of Aquidneck Island. You were 22 years ago was your first station. So 2002, 2009, 2018, and then 2022. Just wondering, from a resident standpoint, what's the biggest takeaway or thing that you saw change in Newport over those years?
I don't think it's, a lot of people might disagree with me. I don't think it's tourism, but I do think it's traffic. This year was, anecdotally, we'll wait for data to come in, but anecdotally it was the worst ever. And I think a lot of that is driven by a post-pandemic, this excitement of return to travel, coupled with really good weather, the Elephants and the USGA hosting a major golf tournament in the city. Everything, all the stars aligned to really put Newport on the map this year, to the point where, while traffic has always been challenging in the summer, over 20 years I've seen it increase, both while I've been here and in between stationings. It is, even though it's not something I necessarily, want to have to answer questions on every day, I also recognize that it is a very salient issue that is challenging. The transportation master plan addressed a lot of alternative modes of transportation. The big trick for us is going to be the car culture in the United States is a very difficult pendulum to swing. But much like I often quote the line from JFK's inaugural address, all of these things won't happen in the first 100 days, but let us begin. I think we really need to begin figuring out ways to encourage people to come to Newport by something other than their personal vehicle. We love the visitors, but if the cars are what, downgrade our safety, both for residents and visitors alike, then it's the cars that we need to take a closer look at and figure out how do we discourage people from bringing their cars to town. Do we do that through residential parking, tougher enforcement of residential parking and higher fines? I think the answer to that is yes, and we have a workshop coming up on that October 2nd to talk about those very items. But that's the biggest change to me, is the volume of vehicles. I don't think it's the volume of people. I've always seen a lot of people in Newport, but it's the volume of vehicles. Wherever there's that much mass of vehicular traffic, there's going to be concerns about safety, and we've seen that borne out this year. The other change that I've seen is the reduction in the police force. This department it's been billeted for a long time for 84 personnel. But right now it's only up until a few weeks ago, it was only at 69. We had a few more academy graduates, so we're up to like 72 now. But when you're operating at like 11 or 12% below your budgeted amount, just because you can't find people to serve as public safety officers, it puts a strain on your ability to enforce regulations and ordinances. I think it used to be easier, but in the modern era, it's difficult to retain and recruit good police officers these days. Some of that is by is because the pay needs to be better, and we're working with the union on responsible ways to improve that, to attract more talent. But other part of it is a social issue. It's difficult to be a police officer right now. There's a lot of scrutiny on police officers, and I won't say whether or not that scrutiny is due or undue. That's not my place to say, but I believe in the profession. I grew up surrounded by police officers. I grew up surrounded by firefighters back in my hometown in Wisconsin. I am who I am today because of some great mentors, and half of them were law enforcement officers. So that's what I want potential folks listening out there who might be high school students, or maybe folks in college, or folks looking for a second career. It is an amazing profession that allows you to get out in the community and do a lot of good and help a lot of people. It's not all about handcuffs and sidearms. It's really about the community impact that you can have. And there's probably no better a place to do that than a community like Newport. But if we can get more people interested in the profession, we can get back to where we were 20 years ago when I was first here, with a force that's able to and has the manpower it needs to enforce the ordinances and regulations that we have, while also engaging with the community.
Before I dive into very rapid fire questions, because I do want to make sure you are prepared for the workshop at 11. I'm wondering, has what you liked or loved about Newport changed over the 22 years?
That's a great question.
Maybe you can think about that when I come back next month.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's a philosophical question. It's great. I'll need more time to think about it. But the answer is, it has gotten better. I love it more than I did in 2002 when I first arrived. But how to quantify that? Yeah, give me a little more time on that one.
Okay. Graduate of U.S. Naval Academy with concentration in oceanography. How does that influence your perspective on a city that's almost entirely surrounded by the ocean and climate change?
Quite a bit. Like I just talked about it, I know a little bit about the effects of wave action on beaches, just because I studied. It was a long time ago. I always wanted to be a weatherman, and that didn't pan out, because life is what happens while you're making other plans. But I still have a great affinity for earth sciences and things like oceanography and meteorology. And so when you're leading a municipality that is on an ocean, particularly in a northern climate that's very susceptible to winter storms, so to some extent hurricanes, but what I think people forget about is that where we really get the most bang for our buck in a negative way is through intense, powerful winter storms. So having a little bit of an idea of what those kind of natural forces can do to coastlines and how they cause erosion and how they remove sand from beaches, I would like to think that it puts me in a position to better explain that to our residents about things like bond measures and why they should be supported. It doesn't mean I'm going to be doing a whole lot of mathematical equations in my job. Those days are long past me. I'm not writing research papers anymore, but I do have an affinity for the science, and I have a good understanding of how it interrelates with the city.
Three more quick questions.
Yeah, go ahead. I've got 15 more minutes. I've got time.
Okay. We have, I brought it up, Anthony. I brought it up earlier that Anthony was asking a question. Just wanted to get back to it. So what is the plan for repaving Spring Street, adding a bike lane? Question, answer.
Yep, no, great question. I can't say, I would have to talk to the city engineer specifically about Spring Street, but what I will say is that one of those items in the bond measure that we actually put in when we took out the city yard, when we decided to come up with an alternative plan for the city yard, which might potentially involve splitting off the utilities department and moving it elsewhere. So we'll cross that bridge later. But we took that $47 million off the bond measure and we said, let's go down the list. What are some of the next things we can do? The road improvement program was high on that list. So there's $6 million allocated in that bond if we're fortunate enough to get it, in addition to our regular general fund expenditures on road improvement. And I would have to imagine that Spring Street is a high candidate for improvement. As for the bike lane, we almost had that temporary bike lane put in front of Folk Fest and Jazz Fest this year. The only reason that wasn't done at the 11th hour is because of a very fair concern from some of the abutting residents that enough due process had not occurred at the council level to seriously consider it. There was a what's called a communication to the council about intentions to do that, but when I went back and looked at the process of how we got there, the council received the communication unanimously and without debate, but they did so 3.5 hours into one of those marathon meetings when everybody was tired and wanted to go home. And so I just made the tough call that I said, I don't think at that late hour, and being that it was not an ordinance or a resolution, but it was just a communication, I felt it wasn't fair to those abutting residents because I don't believe their concerns had been fairly received. I didn't believe that both sides of that issue had a fair chance to have a hearing and have a fair public debate in front of the council. That said, it's not as though the issue might not come back up. I have invited supporters of the measure, such as Bike Newport, to resubmit to allow more time so that perhaps next year we can do this on the experimental basis that they wanted to do this year. I don't want to get into my personal opinions about bike lanes, but I will say that I know there are strong opinions both for and against, especially on what are perceived to be tight streets. But I do believe there's a solution that makes sense going forward that could appease both sides, but I think a more fair public debate is warranted. And I look forward to that debate occurring in front of the city council.
Excellent. We didn't touch base on education much at all, but Beth does have a question. How can the city leaders partner with school committee to strengthen academic achievement?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. For me, that's just about kind of, burying the hatchet. There's a lot of unnecessary acrimony right now between the city staff and between the school committee and the teachers union. And I just really look forward to kind of saying, look, I wasn't here. I understand there are intense challenges on both sides of the issues, especially when it comes to building and Rogers High School. I also understand there are intense challenges when it comes to enrollment and tough decisions that need to be made. But I think we need to do a better job of working together. All four entities. So you've got the department, you've got the school committee, the school building committee. Actually, five departments include the city council and the city staff. There's an opportunity here with me not taking any sides of coming in and saying, look, let's just start over. Let's push the reset button. I do firmly believe that whatever we need to do to finish Rogers High School, we need to do. And I don't necessarily mean in terms of dollars. I just mean a sensible decision to get to the end, to get to the finish line on that project, because it was hurt quite a bit by inflation. There's no doubt about it. I've looked at the numbers. I recognize that some tough decisions were made after the bond was approved in 2020, and then COVID happened, and the train just went off the tracks like it did for a lot of building projects around the country at that time. So we're not unique, but our students deserve a building that they can get into in time for their certificate of occupancy, so that we can get the state reimbursement that if we don't get, we'll be in a $50 million hole. So we need to get it done, and at that point we'll have two new schools in town, Pell and Rogers. Thompson is doing well. It needs some love, but it's nowhere near the condition that Rogers and Pell were. So we'll have all three schools like in really good shape for the foreseeable future. so that we can then invest a lot more of our emotion and our time and our facts and our assumptions into the core education needs of the community, and looking for ways to improve enrollment. Because if you improve enrollment, you are able to frankly, you're able to teach more subjects. You're able to expand your curriculum. You're able to hire more teachers, because enrollment is ultimately what justifies all of these things. How do you get more enrollment? Well, to some extent, you make school appealing to those who left for the homeschool realm during the pandemic. There's nothing wrong with homeschooling. I know lots of great folks who have been homeschooled, but I also believe that public education is valuable, and I really think that if there are families who are willing to take a second look at public education versus homeschooling, that would be wonderful. But more importantly, the way you drive enrollment is by having housing that's adequate for a workforce, so that people who work in Newport can also live in Newport. Because if they don't live in Newport, that means their kids are going to other school districts. Nothing wrong with that. But if we balance out the housing predicament in Newport with good workforce housing that's at a decent rate, that folks who can earn a living here can also live here, then their kids will be able to go to our wonderful school district, be able to attend our buildings, improve our enrollment, which improves our outcomes, because then we're able to do more with that. But by the way, it's also important to point out that there's more to education than just schools. Education is, if you listen to Governor McKee, I think he's dead right on this. It needs to include not just core public education, but also things like lifelong learning, things like job placement, things like job training, things like healthcare. And a big chunk of that includes mental health care. So improving, not only as a city, because we're not a social services agency, but we do have lots of great community partners who we work with, and to some extent provide some financial support to, so that we can improve these outcomes in all areas of education, not just primary and secondary.
You touched on a lot there, and I've been writing them down for next time. But I assume when we were talking about the education bond and the Rogers bond, that inflation has been considered with the upcoming bond that's going before the voters in November. That the numbers there, voters can feel comfortable with the support that those projects that are earmarked there will be supported by the bond.
Yeah, luckily inflation has tailed off greatly. It's now under, I think the latest year-over-year number was somewhere around 3%. Maybe it was 2.9, 3.1. Don't quote me on that, but it was somewhere in that ballpark. For 2.5 years, it averaged around 6 to 8% year-over-year. And when prolonged heavy inflation for that long just really took a toll on the economy. For anybody viewing and listening, that's you remember it when the price of your eggs and your vegetables and your staples went up. But that's one of the reasons that things like we need to take a fresh look at sewer rates. They haven't risen in 5 years despite all of that inflation, but the cost of material for maintenance, the cost to improving that infrastructure has gone rapidly up, and we haven't accounted for that. So these are things that any community needs to take a hard look at and do it. It's always unpopular when a rate goes up, but the private enterprise has the ability to change the rates for the eggs and the and the staples that you buy at the store. Communities have to have some flexibility to do that too in order to stay up with the maintenance. Going 5 years without a rate increase was the longest we had done so since 1980. Typically, if we ever plateaued, it was only for 1 or 2 years. We plateaued for 5 years, so we've got some catching up to do, and inflation played a big part in that. But we're looking forward to overcoming it. As for looking ahead with the new bond, provided there are no more global pandemics, I'm comfortable that the traditional 2 to 3% inflation will be the norm going forward. And so we won't lose as much value on those dollars as we did during the last 5 years.
Linda writes in, and I think you talked about this a lot and explained it a lot, but I'll try to get to the premise of it. Linda, you wrote me a book here, but she wrote, it seems the city is focused on penalizing part-time homeowners in its response to multiple issues, such as house shortage and street parking. While their efforts are notable, they are assuming all part-timers are wealthy, seasonal, absent, clearly not the case. Perhaps our criteria should be considered in judging a homeowner and the significant fines placed on them, such as length of ownership, civic participation. We have lived year-round, part-time in our home for 25 years, longer than most full-time owners, and now pay 27% more in taxes. You talked about why everybody is paying their fair share. You have anything more to add to Linda's question?
Yeah. I definitely am sensitive to the amount of available workforce housing that we have in the city, and with all due respect to Linda, a seasonal home that's occupied for an average of only half the year, if it's not being rented out, doesn't help the workforce. And frankly, if it's not being rented out for at least a year or longer, it's not really helping the equation with our workforce housing. So this is housing stock that is essentially locked up. I love the fact that some members of our community have risen to a state in life where they can afford the luxury of a second home. I hope to do so someday myself. But I also recognize that that in a tight community without a whole lot of build-out room such as Newport, it really puts a strain on our ability to provide affordable housing for our workforce, which then causes the issues we have with enrollment in schools and causes the issue that we have with other strains on our resources. That said, for Linda, I want you to know that I think we can do better when it comes to things like data analysis, machine learning, using artificial intelligence. There are a lot of ways that we can that we can have our cake and eat it too, if we have the expertise and the computing skills to come up to help drive better policy. And up until this point, we really haven't had that. We've seen an explosive growth in seasonal homes because of things like seasonal rentals, short-term rentals, and that's a whole different animal. We'll talk about that some other day. But because of that, it's put this strain on our housing market. And so if we tap into the value that things like machine learning and data analytics can do to help us make better policy choices, we might find that we're not always necessarily required to make what heretofore may seem like draconian measures on some of our seasonal and part-time residents. So I think we can find a happy middle ground, but we do always have to keep workforce housing in the mindset, because up until 5 years ago, we had members of our community who readily worked here and supported our tourism industry and supported the Navy, who were able to afford to live here. And now we don't. The pressure on renters has just moved them all out of Newport. And so we need to find a way to put that back into balance, because any government, state, federal, local, doesn't matter. Any government has a sort of responsibility to make sure the economics of their jurisdiction makes sense. And they sometimes have to make tough choices in order to move the needle so that they're able to have a balanced community. Because if they don't, you end up like, and this is nothing against Nantucket, but Nantucket is struggling with this right now. They have a work class, they have a high class, and pretty much no middle class. The middle class has been erased from Nantucket. So it makes it very difficult for them to run the tourism industry that they need to function as a society. I mean, it's a death spiral if you don't properly and responsibly address it. So hopefully that helps answer the question. I do hope that the data science going forward will help us with some of these things to make better policy.
Wrapping up here, Megan says, thank you for having the new community liaison, getting out to the community and meeting residents where they are. Going up to the Edward King House Senior Center. Will the public workshop on the water bill concerns be recorded today? Some of us are working at 11 a.m. Looking at the city's website, it does look like it's going to be recorded.
Yes, it's going to be live. It's going to be recorded and live streamed. I recognize there's a lot of concern that the meeting was not able to be held during the evening. That was a trade-off that was made. We know that there are some residents out there who have urgent questions and may be due for some urgent relief. And so in order to get everybody available in the evening with, a large council footprint and several staff members, that meant we would have had to wait 2 more weeks to have the meeting, and that's 2 more weeks that we would have had residents, struggling in some cases. So it was a trade-off that was made, in order to have this meeting quickly. And we recognize that it's not ideal to have a meeting like this at 11 a.m., but we felt that time was of the essence. In any case, we are live streaming and recording that meeting as we do all of our public workshops, so that members of the community can listen in and pass additional questions if they have any.
Excellent. I know we're 15 minutes over. We have tons more we could talk about, but was there anything else that you wanted to get out today we didn't get to?
No, I'll just conclude by saying I'm really excited to be here. It's a natural 1 in 4 in council manager governments across America. 1 in 4 chief administrative officers is a veteran. Once I found that out, and I thought, man, this is, I've done staff work for years and years in the Navy, and that's what this is. This is leading teams of people. I enjoy it. I like working with people. I like working with talented professionals. And so, and one thing I did not want to do, and nothing against it for those who do, but I didn't want to continue working in the federal bureaucracy. I wanted to work somewhere local where I could grow some roots and just really get to know my neighbors. And so working in municipal government afforded me the opportunity. And the fact that there was an opportunity in Newport, other than my hometown of Elkhorn, Wisconsin, it's my second favorite city in all of the world. The opportunity to be able to do that here was truly serendipitous, truly a blessing. I'm very, very thankful. I would have done it anywhere happily, but to be able to do it here means a lot to me. Newport has a big chunk of my heart, and I love the community. I have for a long time, and I really look forward to serving it for as long as the community will have me. So I'm excited. I want to get started. I feel like I have this kind of let's get to work mentality right now. We've got a lot to do, and it's exciting to move out on some of the initiatives we have coming up.
All right, City Manager. Well, your homework for next time is like or love what changed over the last 20 years, as well as going forward, come with call to actions for residents, what they can do to help the city, how they can get involved. I didn't tell you ahead of time, so I'm not going to put you on the spot right now, but part of it is just communicating with the city and letting them know your issues and what you're seeing. I would say is the call to action for today.
All right, sounds good. I'll take that homework any day.
All right, City Manager Colin Kennedy, thank you for joining us today. He is off to run to a city workshop. So we appreciate him taking the extra 15 minutes. He will join us on the last Wednesday of every month. If you have any questions for him that you don't want to send them to directly, that you want to be asked during this broadcast, you can visit What'sUpNewp.com, ask the city manager, and drop them in there. I want to thank the 6 or 8 people who dropped questions for him and that we were able to get to today. There are some others. I will take those questions and send them his way and see what we can get answered. And if you missed any portion of this interview, want to watch it again, want to share it, all available on What'sUpNewp.com, as well as it was broadcast on our YouTube page, Twitter account, X account, Instagram account, and more. So thanks for watching, and we will talk to you again soon. Newport School Superintendent Colleen Burns-Germain joins us next Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Thanks for watching.